Welcome to Innovations in Education. I'm your host, David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly. And on this show, we bring guests every single episode who have made things work in public education. This show is about the innovators. This show is about the folks who are solving problems. This show is about making things work in education. Now, there's a lot of shows out there talking about what's wrong in the education systems, and those are great shows. There's some shows talking about what we're not doing well, and there's a lot to learn from those, but that's not this show. This show is going to be featuring educators who are making things work for young people and improving public education. I'm here today with Robin Lake. Robin, you're the director of the Center of Reinventing Public Education, CRPE. Your mission is to develop transformative evidence-based solutions for K-12 public education. You've authored numerous studies and provided expert testimony and technical assistance on charter school, district charter collaboration, and urban school reform. You're the editor of Unique Schools, Serving Unique Students, Charter Schools, and Children with Special Needs, and the editor of Hopes, Fears, and Reality, a balanced look at American charter schools. You provided testimony to the U.S. House of Representatives Education and Labor Committee, as well as various state legislators. You've presented regularly around conferences and summits in the United States and advised on charter school implementation in places like South Africa and the United Kingdom. You've served as a board member or advisor to various organizations, including the Journal of School Choice, National Center on Special Educations and Charter Schools, National Association of Charter School Authorizers, and Education Next. You were named to the summer 2016 class of the Pahara Aspen Education Fellows Programs designed to support exceptional leaders reimagining public education. You hold a BA in International Studies and an MPA in Education and Urban Policy Reform from the University in Washington, and you serve as a professor of practice in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for the reminder of what I've been up to for the last 30 years.
Sometimes we forget. That's why I like to do
Yeah.
the whole read down of the
Mhm.
file. But speaking of things you've been up to, did I get it right that you recently had a birthday?
Oh, yes, it was yesterday. Thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. Nice of you to recognize that.
What did you do?
Well, I started my birthday off well. We had some good weather in Seattle, so I went for a long walk in a beautiful park. And while I was walking, a couple of bald eagles circled over my head a couple of times. So I think that's a good omen for the coming year.
Yeah, that's practically yelling to you that you're the anointed one in education reform, right? Like the American
Or I
man.
like to see things where they don't exist.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We talked a little bit about your bio, and your role right now is the director of the Center for Reinventing Public Education. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to CRPE and what it does?
Yeah, sure. I've spent, believe it or not, 30 years at CRPE, which is kind of crazy. Who stays in an organization that long? But I really was lucky to happen into it when it was just being founded and just getting its legs. My mentor and the founder, Paul Hill, had just been wonderful opportunities for learning and growing. So the center, we're a research and policy center. That's how I like to describe us. So we're not your typical evaluation shop. We don't just do evaluations on programs and things. We really go into research to learn and hypothesize and test things in the field. And what I really love about our organization, Dave, is we get to work with people like you, folks on the ground who are doing the real work. And we really thrive on, building that evidence base, but also learning about what's coming, what's
Mhm.
happening in communities that can inform our work. So that's what we do. And as you said in your intro, we cover a lot of different territory and we like to keep evolving. So one of the things that our founder always said was, we try to look around the corner. So I'm sure we'll touch on that in our conversation today, but we're always trying to look ahead to see not just what are the issues right in front of us, but if we look ahead, what can we start anticipating and planning for?
It's amazing. And so it sounds like this question of the research practice gap in education is something that you guys have been really dedicating your time and energy towards.
Yes, yes. We really try to make sure that our research is pragmatic and really speaks to the issues that people are grappling with, both in practice and classrooms and schools, and really understanding what makes schools work well for adults and the kids that they're serving. and then kind of working backwards from that into the policy realm. So we do tend to think of ourselves as systems people. So we look at policies and district practices, charter management organizations, that kind of thing, and scale. But we always try to stay really, really grounded in instruction. And I've never been a teacher myself, but I love spending time in classrooms and learning about, what works, what gets in the way, and what can we as researchers, evidence builders, and people who are thinking about the systems and structures do to just get out of the way of the magic that can happen in schools when we get it right.
Well, let's talk about what it means to get it right. One of your focus areas is innovation in education, and this show is called Innovation in Education. What should we be paying attention to in the education innovation space?
Well, there's so much going on right now. And by the way, Dave, congratulations on your new grant from the
Thank you.
City Schools Venture Fund. That's exciting.
I
And
appreciate
that's
that.
one of the things to pay attention to for sure. We do a lot at CRPE to kind of track innovations in the field. We have a project called the Canopy Project, run by my colleague Chelsea Wade. And she has been tracking innovative school models now for 5 or 6 years. And she has a big database going. So we're always looking across that and analyzing that, getting nominations from the field. So that's a really great resource for people who want to know what's happening out there. It's called the Canopy Project,
Canopy Project.
and it's a database of innovative school models across the country. And it's a really great resource to see what's happening, what they're working on. Chelsea's recent analysis is showing that most of those school models are really trying to solve for equity. So they really are trying to put all of their resources into who's being underserved in their school and what are some innovative ways that they can get ahead of that. A lot of them are looking at things like innovative career pathways, high school redesign. And as you can imagine, many of them have been thinking for a long time about how to better customize learning, how to think of the student as the X to solve for, and then make the school adapt around every student's needs using data, et cetera. And more, they're starting to look at what I think is one of the most important areas in innovation for us to be tracking. And now you and I have been talking about this in conversations and in gatherings, but AI, what role can AI play? We're doing a lot on the AI front. We can talk about that more if you want to get into it, but everything from innovative school and district practices to what are the policy considerations that folks should be making. And we put out a paper that you helped contribute to, Dave, called Wicked Opportunities, which I'm really excited about and excited about thinking how AI can really further a vision for what we want education to be in the future and how the tools that exist today can get us there and to better serve the needs of kids most in need of solutions. I'll just throw one other innovative area in the mix that we've been working on and looking at, and that is staffing innovations. So our colleagues at ASU, Arizona State University, have been working on this for some time, but really kind of attacking the notion that one teacher and 30 kids in a classroom and good luck is the best idea. Maybe there are some alternatives to that. So we've been fascinated to be looking at schools that are trying something different on that front, having teachers work in teams, using AI as part of the team to inform better customization, allowing teachers to work in specializations, I think is a really interesting one. So more like the healthcare model where we have a variety of different people taking on different roles with regard to students. Maybe some are community educators, but coming together as a team to solve for individual student needs. I think that's really exciting.
There's a lot in there, right? So I heard you talking about this notion of solving for equity, identifying who's furthest away from success and opportunity, and then organizing solutions around those students. Talked about career pathways, customization of learning. I love this conversation about staffing innovations, Robin. I feel like sometimes we just keep pounding our head against the same kind of 8-period structured day. And I'd love to start to think a little bit more around like what we could be doing to make the teaching profession more attractive and more sustainable. And that does get to this question of like, how are we staffing our folks? And then obviously we're going to talk about some AI, right? And AI as an enabler and an enhancer to these solutions and opportunities, not necessarily a solution within itself.
Yeah, that's right. AI also carries risk, and we're really paying attention to those risks as well. My feeling is we let it go, there'll be problems. There'll be equity problems, there'll be privacy problems. We won't realize the potential that it could bring to instruction. So that's why, I just really feel like we need to double down on what can this be? What's the positive vision? What do we want it to be? And work with ed tech developers to, get those tools into the hands of the folks who can really, drive those solutions. It's all going to come down to ultimately human relationships. But, if we can figure this out, we can use AI to really put relationships front and center and relieve teachers of the burden of doing the things that take away from that.
Let's dig into this, right? Because I know you're a bold thinker on AI, you're a bold thinker in educational reform. Tell me about your vision for this notion of relationship forward educators, because folks tend to think that AI will replace relationships in the classroom, that students will be interacting with information delivered through chatbots. But that's not the vision that you just talked about.
When I look at what teachers are using AI for right now, there are a lot of productivity tools, first of all. So if you go on Facebook and you look at some of these chats that are going on AI, teachers are so excited about the time that they can save by doing lesson planning in partnership with AI. One teacher said, I did 6 months of lesson planning in, 15 minutes or something. I mean, just freeing up that time so teachers can reallocate it toward relationships is one thing. But then I'm also starting to see a lot of educators using AI for things like coaching and professional development, which I know you're thinking about. And that's really exciting too, because we've had such a divide for so many years, a gap between evidence-based solutions and what teachers can bring to an interaction with a student they're having right then and there.
Mm.
And if we can close that gap and if we can help the teacher take a complex kid who's got a number of things going on that they're trying to solve for and tap into the resources that AI can help tap into, whether it's evidence based literacy, whether it's mental health solutions. I've seen some data on how AI can really help with evidence based solutions around mental health and anxiety, which is really worth digging into more and understanding how teachers can leverage that in their classroom. So that's one thing. And then, yeah, I think just, getting to know the student better. There's only so much time in the day to get to know students. And if AI can help a teacher really understand quickly who is this kid? What are their passions? What motivates them? I spent some time in a school for autism, actually in New York City Autism Charter School, and they were using tools like this a long time ago. Essentially, I think that if we look at special education as a place to kind of think about what would an AI informed individual education plan look like for special ed kids, but also for all kids, what would that look like? And we have, a number of school districts that are starting to play with some of these concepts at the high school level, more on the career pathway side of things. But I think there's real potential at the younger age level as well. So, it's just rife with possibilities. I think we're only beginning to understand and realize what the tools today and the technology today can provide. But again, I think it's really incumbent that we really imagine a world where every student has really rich relationships with the adults in their lives and is learning to very, very high levels, high expectations, being prepared for the jobs of the future, which are changing so quickly. And our educators are armed with all the information and the data that they need to just, do that on steroids. Or, you might have a different vision of the future. Somebody else might have a different vision of the future. It might vary by community to community. It's great, but let's start with that vision and then really push the ed tech community to deliver the tools that can get us there.
I mean, some of the critiques of the ed tech community have sometimes been that the tail wags the dog, right? The ed tech community comes up with an idea, project, solution, and then the public education system then adapts it and adopts it to their problem set, right? And so I'm hearing you say, like, let's start off with the vision. Let's sit around and say, these are problems that we want to solve for. I love this vision of the IEPs for all students, right? And we have the power to do that. I love how you talked about this notion of productivity around teaching. How do we get teachers to do the things that drive learning and move other things to other places? I love how you talk about this idea of our AI systems and solutions really driving this idea of personalization. And I think that sometimes we get a little bit too, and you may disagree with me on this, but I think we get a little too hung up on the what ifs and the concerns, and we get a little gun shy on the like what ifs. Like, let's what if, right? As opposed to what if.
I mean, I think we can do both, Dave. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can look at the risks and plan for them. They're real. We got to get ahead of them. There's actually a school district being sued right now for alleged unfair plagiarism. Districts have to get their policies in place and attend to those basics. But at the same time, we also have to look forward and think about what we want. We
Well,
have some real problems to solve that go beyond the risks that AI are bringing and, that the aftermath of the pandemic and issues that have plagued education for decades that, we've really got to put everything, technology, creative thinking, everything we've got into solving these problems right now.
Well, okay, so every year, CRPE publishes this American Student Report, the state of the American student, right? And you're talking about here are some of the problems that we need to solve for. What are some concerns, highlights, opportunities that we have with regards to the state of American education, and what should we be tracking in terms of potential solutions?
Yeah, the annual report that we put out it's always sobering. And say that there is some good news out there that we're seeing in the research and data that's being produced. The good news is that I think there's a new hunger for evidence-based solutions that I haven't seen in maybe ever in my 30 years in working in this field. Evidence-based literacy, really getting a handle on what works for kids and developing math skills. Yeah, you've been a leader in the SEL space, and there's been so much recognition among parents and educators that we really need joyful classrooms, not just high performing classrooms, but joyful places where everybody wants to be the adults and the kids, and that kids' whole needs are being attended to. We throw that term around so loosely, but every parent knows what that means. Not just about reading and being able to synthesize books. It's about being, a happy person.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of good stuff to build on and grow on, but a lot of really daunting realities in front of us. And, you know, I just, you've probably seen the data today, but, kids are recovering in their math and reading their sort of basic skills, but it's happening far, far too slowly. One of the things that caught our eye this year was that younger kids, what we call the COVID babies, the little guys who were at home during COVID didn't necessarily go to preschool, didn't have opportunities for socialization, are really coming and struggling. And our schools are really overwhelmed by the continued diversity and intensity of need that they're seeing at all levels. And so I think for me, I'm really taking stock of the reality that that is just not going away for a long, long time. And if we don't act, we will have failed an entire generation of students if we don't start acting radically differently. The other thing this year that we dug into was special population. So we wanted to understand what's going on with kids with learning differences, English language learners, et cetera. And it's really concerning, really, really concerning that I could tell you a lot about the data, but I think what really struck me the most was the interviews we had with parents of kids who have these complex needs, were affected by the pandemic. They were really heartbreaking, really,
Mhm.
really heartbreaking, both in terms of, just the challenges that they faced in their homes. But what we heard too often from families kind of goes to the notion that a reminder that things were not okay before the pandemic either. Parents telling us that they were essentially ghosted during the pandemic and they continue to be by their schools. No bad intent from the school leaders or the educators, but because everybody was overwhelmed, schools kind of disappeared on them. They didn't get information about how their kids were doing. Their concerns weren't taken seriously. We're also seeing some data trends. Specifically, I'm concerned about special ed identification rates climbing. at really, really high rates. We show the data in our report, but you know, what's going on here, I think, it's probably not that more kids have disabilities, probably that more kids are coming in unprepared or just behind developmentally, and we don't have the tools in our general education classrooms to be able to serve them well. So they're being placed in special education, which is, sometimes an academic death sentence for kids. I don't mean to be, too hyperbolic there, but it's real if you look at the data. So yeah, we have a lot of issues. What I'm excited about is thinking about ways that not just technology, but, really great district and state leadership, entrepreneurs like you and community organizations can really bring evidence-based practices to scale, to get them into the hands of professionals who are desperate for solutions to help kind of rejigger our assumptions about what school looks like right now and what staffing looks like so that these are solvable problems for educators and to close this gap, this information gap between parents and teachers. Yeah, I think AI can really help here in informing parents about how their kids are doing and starting conversations at a higher level so that we can get solutions going. So it's a double edged sword on sort of sobering and opportunities.
Let's sit on this for a little bit because we talked about some of the concerns, but there is a mismatch here between the lingering impact of COVID and the funding situation vis-a-vis federal and state allocations to the public education system. How are you understanding the will to continue to solve these problems financially, given the concerns that you've raised up in your report?
Yes, we had a window of opportunity with all these federal funds coming in, and Tom Kane and his colleagues at Harvard and Stanford have documented that that money helped. Probably didn't help as much as it could have. It certainly didn't help enough because kids are still struggling. The money's going away, so what do we do now? What do we do now? Well, the will to fund things that work should not go away. But we also have to get a lot smarter about how to use the funds that we have in really strategic and effective ways. So both of those things I think have to happen. What I am most concerned about, Dave, is that there's been this kind of continued sense of denial about how big the problems are and how much folks are struggling at the school level to be able to fix them. And that's true at the governmental levels, but it's also true among the general public. So if you look at polling and you see that, the public is just not concerned about education right now. And the first step is admit you have a problem. We are not there. And it doesn't help that governors and other state officials, folks at the federal level, are just not talking about education very much. They're not talking about the data that we're talking about in our reports that you're seeing on the ground and the realities. And so that I think is something that has to happen if we're going to have the will to fund and support evidence based solutions.
That's sobering. The data is clear, and I think the example that you raised with our incoming preschoolers and the continuing impacts of the pandemic, it's something that we really need to address. And as I'm looking at how folks are thinking about funding in the education space in our current presidential election and even in the governor space, there is a lack of focus on how to ensure, like the pandemic feels like yesterday's news. Let me say it that way.
Yeah.
That it was a thing, it happened, we're back, we're good, but the data are not as clean as that narrative is. And to your point, the social emotional domain of functioning is still heightened in terms of challenges for our students and how they're interacting with themselves and others.
Mhm. Another really, really critical group that isn't aware there's a problem, parents.
Yeah.
Parents think their kids are doing fine if they get report cards home showing, A's and B's. They're not. They are not doing fine necessarily if they have A's and B's. We know that, but it is a huge problem that we're essentially lying to parents if we're not telling them what skills their kids have mastered and which ones they haven't.
Mm.
And we're just telling them how much effort their kids have put in or, whatever the grades are reflecting. And so that's, I think, central to getting the will addressed is being honest with parents about what's really going on with their kids.
Mhm. Well, Robin, I'm going to pivot here because in 2024, you published a paper talking about 10 predictions about learning recovery, innovation in public education, and innovation in state and public education. And as we're thinking about this idea of pandemic recovery, I want to give you an opportunity to revisit these predictions and see how well you did. So I've got 10 predictions here. We're going to go through a couple of them. And then you can respond, yes, I stand by that prediction. You can respond, no, I want to revise that prediction, and we can talk a little bit about how your predictive abilities reflect the current realities. How do you feel about that opportunity?
Oh, this is going to be fun. I will say I have 2 months left, so a lot of things can happen.
So the first question I think is actually pretty apropos of what we talked about. Your first prediction was that districts serious about addressing learning loss and innovation will have to transform their staffing practices. Agree, refine, Robin.
Agree, agree. And we're seeing a lot of momentum on that front. Look, the staffing issues are just huge and districts are struggling with it. They're looking for solutions. There's a lot of activity going on that front and there needs to be more, but yeah, stand by that one.
All right, stand by. Prediction number two, districts that fail to innovate will require state intervention. Stand by, revise.
Yeah, I still believe that. I think that probably we've got another year until we've seen the financial and true kind of academic impacts coming in. But yeah, more and more districts are going to hit the list of in crisis, unfortunately, if they don't take steps to innovate on the academic front and the financial front.
All right, great. Two of two. Moving on to our next question. More lawsuits will happen and expect more lawsuits and advocacy on behalf of kids who are not recovering lost learning. How does that prediction hold up?
Mm. That one I'm not so sure about. There was a lawsuit in California that was successful. I thought that more state would encounter that same pressure. I haven't seen that coming to pass. Again, we'll see in the next 2 months. But
Yeah, there was
uh,
some fun special education for a little bit in the pandemic around mandated services. But to your point earlier, there seems to be a disconnect between how parents and school districts think their kids are doing in the data.
yeah, yeah, and a misunderstanding of rights. So a lot of parents whose kids have special ed designation didn't know that their child was entitled to compensatory services, basically time to make up lost learning time and lost therapies and services. So without that information, they may not know that they had the right to remediate.
Well, you're doing great, Robin. Two over three, 66% if I got my math right. We have a couple more to go through. The next one is that leading districts will show how to use generative artificial intelligence to radically personalize learning, especially for kids on the margin. Agree, refine, Robin.
Yes,
Yes.
standing by, and actually we have evidence behind this one. So we're coming out in the next few days with a database of districts that are innovating, kind of leading early adopters in the field and saying what they're doing. So there is some exciting work on this front. There are a smaller number than I'd hoped for by this point that are really thinking about radical personalization with AI. Most are doing, kind of tool work and teacher productivity work, that kind of thing. But there is about 15% or so that are really pushing the boundaries here and thinking about what's possible. So it's exciting.
Where can folks find the document when it comes out, the report?
Yeah, well, crpe.org is our website. It'll be on there. And of course, we'll be tweeting it in LinkedIn and etc.
Amazing. All right. So we're doing really well here. Four for five. Next, we're going to move to something that's been struggling. We've been struggling here at the Urban Assembly with that solving for attendance and absenteeism will be paramount. Students can't learn if they don't show up. Stand by, refine, Robin.
Yeah, unfortunately, standby continues to plague our schools. The numbers are just not coming down fast enough from the pandemic. Got to get kids back in school, got to get them learning. We've got to get more evidence about what works on that front. So, in addition to seeing school districts really going deep, Baltimore City, for example, going deep on the data and trying to understand what's working in schools, we're also seeing researchers take this on more and more. So, yeah, hoping the next year we'll really start getting some answers and solutions that people can start acting on.
Anything kind of piquing your interest on chronic absenteeism? I know we're struggling with it at the UA. I've talked to folks across the country. I haven't seen anything that kind of like, wow, we've only done that one thing, but maybe I just haven't been talking to the right folks.
No, I mean, there's some cool stuff happening in Rhode Island where the governor took it on to do kind of a statewide push around absenteeism, getting kids back to school. That was a good political move. I think that the more folks in positions of power can, use their bully pulpit to draw attention to the issue, not a silver bullet. You got to then, follow up with all the data and all the work to figure out, what's working and how we can do more of it. I think, when I hear people talking about solutions, won't surprise you, but it does come down to relationship building, making school more relevant, getting underneath the hood and not trying to drag kids back to schools that they think just aren't working for them, but really understanding how to make school work for them.
Well, shout out to Rhode Island and Commissioner Infante, who is a Bronx superintendent coming out of New York City, going up to lead the work over in Rhode Island. And happy to hear that governor and her are working closely together to get some progress on this. So we're here at 5 for 6. We're doing great. You are maybe the new Nostradamus in terms of your ability to predict the future. But let's move from absenteeism to school boards. Here we go. Prediction number 6. School boards will have to withstand political upheaval everywhere from both the right and the left. Stand by, refine, Robin Lake.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it continues to be the case. We have a survey that goes out in the American School District panel with RAND, and it continues to show that superintendents are really struggling with the politics of all this. It's calmed down a little bit from its peak, during the pandemic, all that craziness and, concerns over books and social studies and all that. But there's always something new. I actually think that AI is going to be a topic for school boards with this lawsuit of the school districts. There's going to be, more and more discussion about AI policy, privacy questions. I'm worried that that's going to be a big one and get in the way of our focus on teaching and learning and AI, but we'll see.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking about trying to figure out what school district was. I want to say it was in Arizona where they were working with an AI company to better predict risk among students for academic and social emotional challenges, and they were organizing around funding for these new predictive models around risk. But the challenge was that the AI company used a black box model, so they could put out the predictions, but they wouldn't tell the district how those predictions were organized. And while each student who received funding ended up receiving more funding, and so the schools themselves can have a large kind of difference in discrepancy in funding, it went down from about 300 per student in general to less students getting $1,200 of additional funding. But that meant for the schools, they were able to staff some FTEs around that work. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
put that out there as well.
Yeah, I think that was Nevada, Dave, if
I
I
wanted
remember right. I actually have it in my newsletter that went out
That's
today.
probably where I
So
read it from because I read your
maybe,
newsletter all the
maybe. Yeah, that's a crazy one. It raises a lot of questions. For me, the transparency questions are front and center, but also I just don't know what state officials were thinking that they could just drive policy without politics getting in the way. I mean, funding decisions are big, big controversial decisions, and they always raise a lot of questions about the formula and what you. So this was maybe a predictable problem. I do think
If they
that.
had read your report, they would have known.
Oh man, but I do think that it should push us to think like, well, the company needs to be more transparent about what was driving the decisions and the formula. But AI is just using logic, and so what logic was it using, and should that kind of challenge our assumptions about how we're funding at-risk kids, what decisions we're making, and we have to be open to learning from these models and having them kind of challenge our frameworks.
Well, we have a couple more to go through here, but I just want to put a finer point on this because we tend to use, from my perspective in education, these gross proxies for ideas, indicators, risk. And what's been interesting to your point around logic is that I think AI and really most researchers can start to parse out this risk against a number of variables that are not always obvious to the school district or even collected in terms of the opportunity. And I just want to throw this one last piece out because I thought it was very interesting that they removed gender from the predictive model, even though gender is a very strong predictor of academic risk and social emotional risk in different ways in different spaces. And so the politics of this, they're real.
They're real. They're real. You can't take politics out of education. That's for sure.
Well, speaking of politics, we got another statement here. States will take charter schools more seriously. Now, this is a political thing. Stand by, refine, Robin Lake.
Hmm. Maybe a fail on that one. I don't think it's happened yet. I still stand by that it probably will happen, but maybe into next year because a couple of reasons. One, the rise of ESAs and more sort of voucher like proposals in a number of states in the past couple of years, for me, raises a lot of questions about equitable access, transparency of outcomes. And I do think that the charter space is really, really well positioned to be able to offer choice that people are obviously hungry for, but with the public protections in
Mm.
place. And I think more states ought to be thinking about that and realizing it. We're also seeing, continued new studies coming out showing what can happen, especially in the charter space for outcomes for kids. There's some new data that the Center for Learner Equity just put out on special education and charter schools that was promising, and some new data coming out of Denver about the Denver reforms the past decade that included charter schools as part of the fabric of Denver's reform
Cam-
strategy.
Camden, New Jersey came out with some good data with regards to the ecosystem of charter district. Well, I don't want to say they were in competition, but the choice created a competition that supported student outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. So, one would think that if we're following the evidence where it leads, we would consider that more seriously. Now, you pointed out times are getting tighter on the financial front, and so it makes it hard to start new schools. I think that for all the reasons we've been talking about in this conversation, we really need states and the federal government to be providing more seed funding for innovative and equitable
Mm.
schools. The money's got to be targeted toward kind of comprehensive and coherent programs that work at scale, hopefully in partnership with school districts as well, because that can really turn the tide. We've seen the evidence work, but it's not magic. You just don't do it without investment and really strong oversight and accountability for results.
I want to put you a little bit on this charter school space because you did mention the voucher programs that are happening across the country for non-public schools. I mean, explicitly non-public schools. Now, there's some folks who would argue that charter schools were the Trojan horse for this approach around independent or public funding for non-public schools. It's not that states took charter schools more seriously; states took school choice more seriously. How do you see that kind of contradiction? Some
Yeah,
states.
that's right. I mean, I like to just, much as possible, sort of, assess the evidence. I've never seen any evidence that, more charter schools lead to more private school choice. In fact, I've seen the opposite, where most of the charter school laws that were passed in the early days were done in response to voucher initiatives saying, no, that's not good enough in terms of protecting the public interest. Where I get really kind of enlivened is thinking about what's going on with families and kids. What are they asking for, and how can we deliver a range of opportunities? And there are a number of states that have said, look, a lot of different types of choice are needed. We don't have to be battling each other. We can have a number of different experiments going and make sure that we're tracking the outcomes and doing more of what works. In district choice can be great. Charter schools can be great. Obviously, there's a lot of demand for these private school options, but let's keep tracking the evidence. I do think, the range, the diversity of need that's out there, the intensity of need, it's better for us to be thinking about doing more things that involve choices and options at very high quality and not pitting one against the other.
Well, Robin, we're at 6 for 8. You're doing a great job out here. And we got three more questions that we're going to go through from your predictions in 2024. The next is that good instruction will come back into vogue as central to achieving equity. Stand by, refine, Robin Lake.
Well, at least I'm very much still optimistic about this. This is hard to quantify. And as a researcher, somebody who likes to follow evidence, hard to say if it's really happening yet. I feel that it is. I feel that more conversations that I'm in lately are about good instruction, evidence based instruction, making sure that kids have the skills and competencies they need. And yeah, sure, I'll stand by this one.
Stand by. All right.
Maybe it's aspirational, but I'm standing by.
All right, our last two are going to be focusing on the presidential election and college access. So the first one, college access will be cool again. Refine, stand by, Robin.
Let me clarify what I meant by that a little bit because I was a little cheeky in my headline. I did not mean to say that college is the endpoint for all kids. I think that we started in the past couple of years in particular, we started sort of zeroing in on career relevance, career pathways, which I think is really critical, really healthy, really important. But I also think that there's, a renewed recognition that higher education provides something critical for kids in terms of intellectual growth and readiness for a career. And that it doesn't have to be an either or. And so I think a lot of the career pathway conversations are edging in this direction of college and career. I think what's most important is making sure that we think of this system of K-12, higher ed, career as a permeable system that doesn't have any dead ends for kids, that offers continual reentry points. I think it's going to be more and more critical with jobs changing so quickly. Young people and even adults are going to need opportunities to re-enter the education system in new ways. And our higher education system has the opportunity to renew itself to be able to do that. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm hearing more and more conversation about permeable, interrelated systems rather than one or the other.
Deeply resonant with that. This notion of stackable credentials that are interchangeable across institutions and that folks can re-up and reskill with the purpose of education being preparation not only for community but for career as well. So we've come to the last prediction here, Robin, and you've been doing great. Right now you're at 7 for 9, and I'd like to get you to 7 for 10, but I can't make that choice. So we're going to have to let the chips fall where they may. All right, last prediction. Barring collective action, public education, and pandemic learning losses will fade from view as a key voter concern, even during a presidential election year. Robin, stand by, refine.
Unfortunately, I really stand by that one. We're seeing it play out right in front of us. Presidential candidates really aren't talking about education. We're not seeing much news coverage about it at the national level. We're not seeing governors talk about it. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a sad but true, but I hope that maybe our conversation can help reinvigorate this larger notion of what it means to be educated in 2024 and beyond. I know you publish a newsletter on AI, you publish an annual report on the state of the American student. Anything else that our folks should be tracking from CRPE as we look to ensure that young people get what they deserve in our public education system?
The only other thing that I'd suggest in terms of reading material is the paper we produced from the Albuquerque gathering that you were part of, Dave, is Wicked Opportunities, a paper about how AI can help us realize a positive vision of education in the future and what it will take, both in terms of funder investments, policy moves, and work to better connect the education and ed tech communities. I thought that the collective wisdom of that group was really, really, thoughtful, and the call to action was very strong. So as we continue to kind of muddle forward in this AI uncertainty, I think that's a good one.
Well, Robin, we started talking about your 30 years at CRPE. We talked about innovation in public education, talked about some of the concerns that we have around the state of the American student. We talked about bald eagles circling around you on your birthday to make sure that they knew that you were going to help move this vision forward. We really appreciate your time, your efforts, your dedication to using data and evidence-based practices to improving public education. And I look forward to seeing what we can do together for the American student.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm such an admirer of the work and just really had fun today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to our latest episode of Innovations in Education, where we bring education leaders who have made things work in the education sector. If you like this episode, please subscribe so that you can hear more great content around innovations in education. I've been your host, David Adams, and have a great day.